As a cinematographer, commercial lighting is one of the hardest things to execute. But why? Lens choice, light selection, modifiers, and even fabric selection. The list goes on and on of what affects the look of your commercial. With all these choices and decisions you have to make as a cinematographer, it can be overwhelming to even find a place to start. This is the video where I cover everything, from mindset all the way to the details of why I make certain decisions to achieve the commercial look. I'm going to be doing that by breaking down one of the biggest commercials that I have shot in my career and show you my exact process. But before we get into that, let's talk about commercial lighting. When it comes to commercial lighting, the fundamentals don't magically change. The same principles you already know: a key, a fill, a backlight, and shaping contrast and motivating sources still apply. The main difference, and what is very intimidating, is just the scale. Instead of lighting using a single subject or small room, now you're responsible for an entire set, multiple talent, and creating a look that matches the brand's polished and high budget feel. That means bigger lights, more gear, and a larger crew. But the mindset still stays the same. Break down the scene, decide what story the light needs to tell, and then scale your tools to make it happen. Now let's dive into this commercial where I'm going to be breaking down everything and see how we can apply these steps to commercial lighting. When it comes to shooting larger scale commercials, 90% of the work is done in the pre-production process. And at the end of that, you're going to have a document that you can present to really literally anybody, agency, client, or more specifically your crew, and they can look at this and understand exactly what's going on. I'm only going to be looking into the look and feel and how to approach a project like this so you can understand the decisions that I had to make as a cinematographer, and it just gives you a lot more context. So this was for Thrifty Foods, and this was actually two 15-second spots, but we're only going to be looking at one of them, and it was to launch some of their kebabs. So when we go into the look and feel, this was established by the director, who was my partner, which was a lovely process to work with. And she always gives me what exactly I'm supposed to do on this first slide. These vignettes are all about purposeful camera movements set against the backdrop of a vibrant summer backyard get-together. With this imagery that she already has, and with this sentence, it's really easy to dive into this and really establish what this commercial is all about. And in addition to that, we have a summary of just 6 images and GIFs that you can call here as well that dictate the camera movement as well as the look and feel. So we are going for a very bright backyard feel with lots of contrast, sunlight, but also this soft lighting that you see across all our subject's face. That is associated with commercials. If this was a real backyard and this was at like 12 o'clock and we're having lunch, or even evening having dinner, it would be very harsh. And that is not what people are looking for when it comes to commercials specifically. So they wanted this summer backyard feel, but they also wanted the landscape and the backdrop to be Vancouver, or just bright, airy, open sky. So A, we don't have that here in Toronto. And B, when we shot this was the beginning of summer where everything started to bloom and we didn't have access to weather or even a backyard that would look at this scale. And so what we actually had to do is do a studio build. And this was just based on the constraints of the project when we had to shoot it and everything that was going on. And then it was already sold that all the skies, everything would be VFX. So we did this at a local studio, 2D house, and we had to paint the cyc wall blue to get that blue screen that we're looking for, because we just didn't want to shoot it on a backdrop, and I wanted at least 180 degrees where I could shoot, or at least shoot into a corner. And now with this studio build that we're going for, I don't have a lot of ambient light. So I had to talk with the gaffer, and he recommended building an overhead softbox with some lights up in there, and then also lights to light the blue screen. So at this larger scale, when you're working with a lot of different people, to give you a context, I had a gaffer, a key grip, and their bests, as well as a dolly grip. So I am going to rely on their professional opinions on how to exactly achieve a look like this. And Jordan, the gaffer in this case, he is standing right there. It's like, hey, you're going to have to go with an overhead softbox, and we're going to have to light the blue screen separately. With the studio package, this is pretty easy to pull off. And then this is when the actual set dressers and everybody started to dress the scene. But now if we look inside of what is going on here, we have a bunch of lights, and these are just studio space lights. I think they're like octos or something like that, and they're just the bare bones of what a light is. It's just a panel. It's an octo. They're just put up in the ceiling very easily. And then to light the blue screen, we had a bunch of sky panels around here. So I just wanted to start with this to showcase what it takes to shoot something at this scale, especially when you're doing all this VFX work as well. And this is just the base. Now we're gonna get into everything that we kind of decided on to how to achieve this commercial lighting look. We have our space set up, we have our ambient, and then we also have our blue screen lit. When we break this commercial down and play through it, we are looking at 5 shots, and 2 of them are relatively the same, which is the beginning and end frame, which usually is when it comes to commercials like this. And if you notice, there is always camera movement. We're either pushing in, pulling out, or whipping. That is always associated with commercials, and especially with the director style that my partner likes to use, who's Sophia. And now when we go into what this looks like, this is the general lighting diagram that I like to build out, and that it changed per setup what we're exactly looking at. When we started the pre-production process, the production designer gave me an entire layout of what the space was exactly going to look like. So this allowed me to make basically this layout and this blueprint that everybody could follow. I could send this to the key grip, I could send this to the dolly grip and my gaffer, and at the beginning of the day, they know what they're doing for basically the next 3 hours to set up everything. So now when we look at this is the setups that we're going through, where we have this push in, we have another push in with the barbecue over here, and then we have this push in with the whip of our talent over here. And you can notice that I use the same lighting setup throughout the entire thing because we were going for the same look and feel throughout all these entire shots. I'm not going to dive into this right now because we're going to lay it out here and it's going to make a lot more sense.
I just want to take a brief pause on this breakdown and talk about something that changed my career as a cinematographer, and that's pre-production. The biggest mistake I see cinematographers making today is thinking that the majority of the work is done on set, but it's actually the opposite. This is why I created the Pre-Production Playbook. This is a step-by-step guide where I take you through how to plan and prep for a project through my personal process that I have been developing for the past 5 years of my career. From 6-figure commercials to low-budget spec projects, I cover it all. I personally invite you to click on the link in the description and check out the Pre-Production Playbook today. Anyways, let's get back to the video.
Put your hands together for our team's picks. Thrifty Kitchen's marinated kebabs. Made from Canadian chicken, beef, or pork. They're loved by us and picked for you. Oh, hey, kebab?
So let's pause on this frame right here and start talking about the interesting things when it came to this commercial. I want to break this down with the basics that we're looking at. The biggest thing if you want to achieve realistic commercial lighting is always to motivate your light source. And I like to apply this through whatever I'm shooting. If there's a window, I'm going to key from that side. In this case, we're in a studio, so I can choose where my light is motivated from. And I have to ask always myself, what exactly am I shooting? And this is a sunny, bright day from the look and feel of what was established. So this is my sun over here, which is just peeking out of frame and it's coming in. And this is already dictating where my key is going to be. So I get a nice edge light right here, and then his face is perfectly lit across, and then I have some negative fill on this side. So my light already makes sense that, oh, it's going to be coming from this side. So that's just the first thing that I want to look at, but let's get into the details that everybody is probably asking about. So we shot this on the Venice, and I used the RE signature primes. We had access to an 18mm, a 29, and also a 35. The biggest challenge with this production was not revealing the softbox or going past the edges of the wall, specifically on the edges over here as well as over there. So I had sourced an 18, but I knew that was going to be really difficult to shoot with. So this was primarily shot on the 829 and 35. I just kind of switched it up depending on what the shot was and what we were looking at, but 90% of this commercial was shot on the 29. And now when we look at these lenses, I believe they shoot at a T1.8 or 1.9. I was always shooting at a T2.8, and I've been testing this a lot. I like to usually shoot a T2.8 as well as T4 because this is revealing a lot more of the scene. We have this beautiful production design, all these colors and everything that's going on, and I have the opportunity to show everything in focus. That's what makes a really good commercial, all these departments coming together. And when with Sophia's work specifically, she likes to source so many different colors. We got pops of orange in the background, yellow, orange even more with these realistic looking flowers, the peppers here, the peppers on the grill, the red grill itself, the green in the chair, the woods. everything, the yellow ladder, everything is just made intentionally to pop, and it really makes my job easy as a cinematographer. So that was the main camera that we're going to be looking at, and we shot everything on this, and we also use the probe lenses, which I'm going to be going into the next shot. But now when we look at our lighting diagram, okay, we have a lot of things going on. But let's start with our key light. I always like to use, when I'm in studio work or when I'm shooting commercials like this, I like to make my source big. And I like to bounce between a 6x6 frame as well as an 8x8 frame. And I always like to use artificial silk, and this stops it down by 2.5 stops. And this just gives me a nice soft look. You could use a half grid, a full grid, but I just generally like to use artificial silk because with LED lights, especially with studio package, you can usually punch through that and really get a really good output. So this is giving me all my light across here and is going across my subject, and I'm usually at a 45-degree angle, so the wrap goes around his face and not necessarily as an edge or a split lighting. And then the lights that we have behind here is when I have access to a studio and I have access to so much space, I'm always using some sort of panel light. This could be a Nova, this could be a sky panel. In this case, we just use cream sources because that's what was in the studio package. And I set these to 4400 Kelvin because I wanted this warm sunlight and not necessarily a bright daylight. That's what is usually associated in how you can sell sunlight by making it a little bit warm. So the reason I like to use panel lights instead of like a 600C or something else here is because it spreads the light across the whole silk a lot better. The whole point of commercial lighting is to get a soft key light that is big as possible, and that is really associated with getting a catch light in your subject's eyes. It's not adding so much diffusion so it feels diffused, it's making it big. And if I take a point source light like a 600 or something like that, 600C or a 600D, it is a point spreading across. Well, I can already start with something that's already pretty big, and that's why panel lights are just so much used as these key lights going through fabrics. And then I wanted to control that, so I have two floppies right here, and those are called siders, and that basically prevents the spill going on the backdrop and anywhere else that's going on here. So it would probably be spilling on the chair or something else like that. So that is my key light setup, and we had this all on rolling stands, and then we just kind of moved it around. And the next thing I added is some negative fill. So it was just an 8x8 solid on another rolling stand, and that we rolled around everywhere else. So this is adding contrast back into my subject, which really allows me to play on what commercial lighting is. And I don't really like to go for like light going across the face. I like deep, rich contrast in my images, and you can see that across here as well. And in addition, it kind of blocks out the blue spill that was coming from the background. I know the colors took a lot of that out, but it really helped as well. And then another thing that I'm missing here is, of course, that big overhead softbox that is also giving me a nice edge light everywhere, and you can really see it on his arms here. But it's just adding level to the entire space. It's not necessarily giving me a nice edge light or anything. It just gives a soft light that lights up the entire space, similar to if you walk outside, there's just light everywhere. So that is what essentially the softbox is doing above us. And then we can go into the little lights that paint really everything that is going on. So we had an Aperture 600C, and this was with a f10 Fresnel as well as barn doors, and this was acting as our big sun in the sky that you can see there. So you can notice, again, my key light is on this side and my sun is on this side, so it looks like the light is coming from the sun, which really doesn't make sense if you really think about it, because the sun wouldn't do that. But it's commercial, so we don't really care. And then I had a 1200X on a spotlight. So this was the Spotlight Max, not a regular spotlight because of the power, as well as a CS15 shooting through a Kukularis board. And that was giving me all the texture and everything on the background. You really have to think about your lighting in layers. We have our subject, and then we have our background. And then sometimes you have something in the foreground as well. So you have your foreground, your midground, and your background. And what makes commercial lighting really good is lighting your background, obviously lighting your subject, but more importantly, lighting your scene so it feels as realistic as possible. I wanted to really introduce harsh light going through our scene, and that is usually associated with really sharp shadows that you can see all over these leaves here, as well as the ladder over here, and then right over here as well. If I just had one light shooting through the scene, it wouldn't really make sense, and you have to build this out with multiple lights. That's the way, unfortunately, lighting works when you're working in a studio and you're trying to recreate what's naturally in the environment. So that 1200X is shooting through here. It's giving me all these shadows over here, and then we have that CS15 shooting on the Kugelaris board, and it's shooting through here and giving me a lot of texture on the ground and giving me a lot of levels and things to play with. And in addition to that, we also had an ADC built. It's not necessarily in my lighting diagram, and then I use that to add spots of light on a lot of different places, and that is shooting through a little bit here to add some light onto this chair leg. Why did I do that specifically? I just basically wanted to create a canvas of light and dark parts of this entire, canvas that I'm working with. That is what contrast is. That is what makes an image interesting when we talk about the lighting basics. Now let's move on to one of the most interesting shots in the piece is this barbecue shot here. And the big thing is that we have this red barbecue here, and then now we're inside of the barbecue. And the big thing is like, oh, did you guys just have another barbecue that we cut in half? And if you look at the BTS, it was nothing like that at all. The production designer just basically wrapped, I believe it was some polyboard or something like that, spray painted it black, and then we hung 2 grills so we can actually move through this at different sizes. And then if you look here, you can see the shadows of the piano wire that we used to hang that. But because there's so much motion and then also the VFX flames added, everything just looked really good. And this is the favorite shot of the piece that the director and I were very proud of. And then now when we talk about the execution, we obviously wanted to achieve this potentially practically, but there was just a lot of things associated with that. So we had a campfire stove thing that we tried, but it did not look good at all. The main thing that we wanted to achieve to capture this as practical as possible is just to have some light on these rocks that was flickering like fire themselves. So that's why we tried with the campfire, the campfire stove, but it didn't work at all. So I had an idea of why don't we just use MCs to add that light in, and then we just set 3 of them to the fire effect, and they're sitting literally right under the grill. You can even see one of them right here and another one over there, and they're set to around 50% with the fire effect going, and that gives me a realistic lighting and something with the VFX artist to work with. Because if you just look at this in a still frame, it doesn't really look good, but if you look at the motion, the lighting, the VFX, as well as the haze really sells everything that's going on. And then you even see those little highlights on our little pieces of fake chicken and beef here going on as well. And when it comes to the lighting diagram and what we changed here, we didn't really change anything at all. We just moved everything in, and then I had an additional flag, which is like an 18 by 36 flag, silk flag here, diffusing his face a little bit more. But this is a fantastic, again, example of that motivated light from our son. It's hitting him as a nice edge light, and then that wraps around his face even more. That's what we're always trying to achieve, of wrapping and bringing that light around from that source itself. And then we have that negative fill back in our subject right over here. So we have a beautiful contrast ratio when we look at his face, and that is achieved with our big negative fill here. But if you look at the lighting diagram, I have a bunch of other things here that I potentially wanted to use. And again, silk flag on talent just to cut down the levels, a potential double net so we didn't run into hot levels on the barbecue itself, and then maybe another light mat boomed out so we can wrap that light around even more. These are the things that were just kind of a nice to have, but we didn't end up using them, and they ended up on standby. But we ended up using the silk flag a bunch for when we were going into these close-up shots. So this was shot on the straight prove, and then we used a dolly to achieve the jib movement here, and it's a simple straight up and then just planning and timing with the talent. So this was the most complicated shot to pull off, but it looks amazing and we're super happy with the results. When it comes to this next shot, the lighting really didn't change. We just moved the sources around to get them out of frame to really position everything that was going on. But we had to do something really funny to get the barbecue in frame so it looked realistic. When it comes to commercials and just everything having a proper makes sense is continuity. And that is the biggest thing. When we originally set up this frame, frame, the barbecue was totally out of frame because if you look at the height difference at the beginning of the commercial, look how low the barbecue is and look how much he's bending over. But then soon as he stands up over here, why is that barbecue that high? Obviously, if you play these shots back to back, it wouldn't necessarily make sense, but I knew that we would be cutting with that raising shot in between, so I could really cheat things here. And the director and I were talking and be like, oh, it'd be really nice if we could get the barbecue in frame so we had more context. It doesn't feel like that he's pulling it out of midair. And that is the thing with commercials. Every frame has to tell a story, and they have to live on their own, and they also have to be connected. So to do this, we basically put the barbecue on a series of apple boxes, and our talent is standing right here, and now it's at his chest level, and then we had a bunch of apple boxes there. So that's just one thing that I want to kind of talk about when it comes to problem solving, especially when it comes to commercial things like this. You have to give context with every frame, and it's super important. The last frame that I want to look at is like another perfect example of what commercial lighting looks like. So again, we have our subject here. The fence is kind of at this angle, kind of drawing it off angle. Our dolly and camera are pushing in this way. And then now, if you look at our silk direction of what we're kind of going with, it was more flat and frontal like this, kind of 45 degrees to my camera, but not 45 degrees towards the subject of where they're looking. And this allows you to get the perfect catch light in their subject's eye. That's the main thing that we're looking for. Even if we go to a close shot, a shot like this, the catch light doesn't really exist here because he's not looking at our light source. In this frame over here, our subject is looking at our light source, which is right here. So it allows that big catch light to happen, and it gives you contrast and little specular highlights in the eyes themselves. I'm just going to erase these for now because it looks kind of funny. But when we talk of the basics on everything that is going on, we still have that 600 with the Fresnel boomed up over there. We just had to move it across our scene. So if we kind of look at the angle of everything that's going on now, it used to be over here where our sun is, but now it's over here. And that gives us our beautiful edge light that is going on the edge of her face as well as the edge of the hat. And then again, we have that soft source going across her entire face. And then we have our negative fill sitting right here and adding only a slight little bit of contrast back in our subject. And you can kind of see it on the arm that is subject to the tree as well, and a little bit into her face. Again, a very low contrast ratio when it comes to looking at your subject's face. That is associated with commercial lighting. If you guys enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments below. I love breaking down commercials, especially when it goes to the nitty-gritty details, especially when it comes to achieving certain looks. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next video.